And good morning to you all. How's everyone doing this morning? Good. Tryptophan coma is worn off by this point, right? You're caffeinated today and ready to engage in God's word? Maybe? Maybe not? Yeah? All right, good deal. Our ushers are going to come down the aisles this morning and bring some Bibles. We're going to be in Daniel chapters 11 and 12, finishing our sermon series this morning. I want to say good morning to you all. I know JR has said it, but good morning. My name's Sean. I'm one of the pastors here, and I'm thankful to be up here and with you today. And I hope you had a good week full of thankfulness. You know, I have been very blessed by this church family. There's a ton to be thankful for in this season. And so I hope you've experienced some thankfulness this week as well. I'm thankful for our kids who are in here this morning. Kids, welcome. Super excited for you guys to be in here, engage with us this morning. So welcome upstairs with the big kids. This will be fun today, all right? We're going to get into the Bible in just a little bit. Like I said, finishing our Daniel sermon series, chapters 11 and 12 of this great book. But there's a lot of ground to cover this morning. And kids, because there's so much to cover, you may miss a few things here and there. You may not understand a couple things. Adults, you might not understand a couple things as well. That's okay. But kids, I want to encourage you to listen and catch what you can. And maybe this morning you can draw a picture again. I know a couple weeks ago I had you draw a picture. Maybe draw a picture again this time as you listen. There's going to be a couple stories that come up about people by the ocean or by rivers. In fact, at the end in chapter 12, we're going to see Daniel. He's back by the river, and there's this image of two angels and God hovering over the waters. Maybe that might be a picture for you to draw and meditate on this morning a little bit. And I would love to see it at the end. If you draw a picture, I'd love to see what that looks like. And as you're listening, maybe us all, maybe we can think of, or maybe you've heard of a woman by the name of Florence Chadwick. Now, this is an older story from about 70 years ago, but anyone ever heard of Florence Chadwick? Anyone know this gal I'm talking about? Some kind of these hand things going on, maybe? There's a story about Florence. She was a long-distance swimmer. She swam in open water. She was the first woman to swim across the English Channel, there and back again, and set records doing it. In 1952, Florence stepped out into the Pacific Ocean in an attempt to swim from Catalina Island to the California coast, across the Catalina Channel. That's something like 20 miles of swimming in cold, open ocean water. And I can hardly swim 20 feet, let alone 20 miles. But as she went out, she set out, and for a long time she was swimming. 15 hours she was in the water swimming, trying to set this record. And she got closer and closer to the California shore, but as she did, a thick fog moved in, obscured her vision of the coastline. Shortly thereafter, she began to get a little bit tired, discouraged, and decided to call the swim off. She signaled for the rescue boats to come, and they came, and she got in the rescue boats, and it was only after calling it off that she realized that she was only about a half mile away from the shore. Had swam 19 and a half miles, was a half mile away, and she called it off. The next day in a news conference, she said, "All I could see was the fog. I think if I could have seen the shore, I would have made it." How interesting. If I could have seen the shore, I would have made it. How true is that for our lives at times as well? You ever been in a situation where you felt like, man, if I could just have seen through the fog, seen what was out ahead, things would have been totally different. Things may have been gone a different way, or may have been able to persevere or endure the hardship, the struggle. Things might have turned out differently. And maybe the path doesn't necessarily change, but our perspective in the midst of it surely does, doesn't it? Knowing what lies ahead can be of such great help for our patience and our endurance. Knowing how things will be in the end can have a huge impact on how we live here and now. And that's what I want us to consider this morning as we come to the end of this awesome book of Daniel. God is giving us a glimpse of what is up ahead, through the fog, as it were, in order to help us, in order to help Daniel, in order to help his people prepare for and to endure what would come. God wanted Daniel and his people to live in their day in light of what was to come ahead. And likewise for us, we too need to live now in light of the end that is to come, prepared for what might be there. Like Florence, as the fog clears and the shore comes into sight, we should be filled with the knowledge and the hope and the assurance that we will make it in the end. We've been asking this question all these last 12 weeks we've been in this sermon series. How shall we live as faithful exiles in beastly kingdoms? And our text this morning, I think, teaches us one final answer. Faithful exiles live now. We live now in the present. We live now in light of what is to come in the end. Now this morning, we're going to sort of be like a rock skipping out across the water. Anyone ever taken a rock and thrown it on the water and had it skip a bunch of different times? I think the record is some like 88 skips. That's incredible. I don't know how you can do that. I can skip maybe 2 or 3 times or something like that. There are times when we will be like a rock that just plunges straight on in and dives in and sinks down deep. Sometimes we'll skip across the water. This morning, because we have such a wealth of things to cover, we're going to skip across the water a little bit in chapter 11 before we land in chapter 12. So just so you know, that's kind of where we're going. But again, as we turn our attention to God's word, let's ask that he would lift the fog and show us beautiful and wonderful things on the shorelines to come. So let's turn to him and pray and dive into God's word. Lord, we need your help this morning. God, there is much to cover, much to see, Lord, much that we want to glean from in your word. And God, what is more, the God of this world has blinded the eyes of those who do not believe. God, we are a people who believe, but help us even in the midst of our unbelief at times. Lord, you give us sight through the fog, that we might see beautiful and wonderful things as we turn to your word. And God, cause us to live our lives, to be changed, so that we might live now in light of what is to come for us one day. And so help us. We need your help, God. And so help us in the power of your Spirit. And in Jesus' name, in his name we pray. Amen. All right. So again, like rocks skipping out across the surface of the pond, we're going to touch down in a couple different spots in chapter 11. And just to help us kind of know what's going on, I'm going to do a bunch of summarizing here in this chapter. The vision of chapter 11 covers some 400 years of ancient history. Chapter 10, we started last week. Daniel begins to get this vision from the angel of what is to come. And then in chapter 11, we see the vision. Chapter 12, we can kind of conclude and wrap up all kinds of things. And what God reveals here in Daniel chapter 11, again, is some 400 years of the progression of kings and kingdoms and their reigns, things that will take place long after Daniel's life, long after he had died. But to spare you the nitty-gritty details of the history lesson, I think we can summarize it in just a few simple words that we see at the start of our text. Kings shall arise. Now, the history is really, really cool. The specificity, the accuracy is nothing short of miraculous here. That God, 400 years in advance, would share all that has happened in the exact detail in which it occurred is mind-blowing. But again, I think we see, and we can sum it up in a few simple words, kings shall arise. Look at chapter 11, verses 2 and 3. And now I will show you the truth, says this angel. Behold, 3 more kings shall arise in Persia, and a 4th shall be far richer than all of them. When he has become strong through his riches, he shall stir up against the kingdom of Greece. And then a mighty king shall arise, who shall rule with great dominion and do as he will. Daniel has been waiting some 70 years for the end of exile, for their return home. But the message of the angel here is that though the exile would end, it would come to an end, the people would return to their homes, they would not be the sovereign nation that they desired to be. Beastly kings and beastly kingdoms would continue to rise. The end would not be yet for these faithful followers of God. And what the rest of chapter 11 reveals to us is this rise and fall of many kings and many kingdoms over the course of the centuries. Now, we've seen this before. Remember back to the visions and dreams Daniel had before, chapter 7, chapter 8, chapter 9. All of this continues to show us that kings will rise and kings will fall. It was the Babylonians first, right? That's who they went into exile under. Then the Persians came, then the Greeks, then the Romans, constantly rising and falling of beastly kings and beastly kingdoms. And here, chapter 11, it is as if it zooms in on these Greek kingdoms and their progression. After the Babylonians was the Persians. After the Persians was Alexander the Great. After he came, 4 kings rose, and then there was this division between the north and the south. Kings of the south around Egypt. Kings of the north around Syria today. And over again, king after king would rise and would fight and would war and would try to conquer one another. Kings of the south against the north. Kings of the north against the south. Over and over and over again. And then their kids would rise and do it over again and perpetuate the cycle time and time again. And who's caught right in the middle of this conflict? What is right between Israel to the south and Syria to the north? There's a conflict going on in this region right now at this very moment, right? Israel is caught right in the middle of all of this. God's people were constantly caught between the crossfire of these warring nations, these warring beastly kings. And so God told them what was going to happen so that they might be prepared for it. Look at some of the language of chapter 11. We've seen it in verses 2 and 3 already. Kings will rise, but look at verse 5. It speaks the same sort of thing. But one of his princes shall be stronger than he, and he shall rule. Verse 7. And from the branch for roots shall one arise in his place. Verse 13, another king. For the king of the north shall again raise a multitude greater than the first. Verse 20, then shall rise in his place one who shall send an exactor of tribute for the glory of his kingdom. Another king comes. Verse 21, and in his place shall arise a contemptible person. Again, over and over and over, king after king after king comes to fight. Monarchs rising one after another. We don't have time to look in depth at all of them, but again, the specificity, the accuracy is mind-blowing. Absolutely incredible. Down to the minutest details of how these things played out. If you're curious about that, you can ask me later. I'll give you some resources. But I think all of that, this constant rising of kings over and over again, in the exact way God said it would happen, shows how big and powerful and sovereign our God is, working all things out according to his wonderful plan. And this was important for God's people to know, so that they would remember that despite present circumstances, God was in control. They were not to be caught off guard. You see, some of these Jewish exiles had the expectation of returning home from Babylon and becoming a great nation again, but God told them that would not be the case, that other, more powerful nations would rise, would oppress, would subjugate them over and over and over again. It's as if God let them see through the fog for just a little bit of time, to look ahead and to know what was coming, that they might be prepared now. There's one king in particular that this really focuses in on. We've seen him before. We've seen him a couple weeks ago when we looked at chapter 8. One wicked, evil, despicable king who's called this contemptible person in verse 21. Who's that king? Antiochus Epiphanes. Remember him? Antiochus, son of God. Antiochus, God manifest. He was this wicked king who arose, and he gets top billing in these chapters. There's 15 verses or so devoted just to this king to tell what happened with him and how he rose. Look at verse 21 through 25 with me. Speaking of Antiochus, it says, in his place shall arise a contemptible person. That's Antiochus there. To whom royal majesty has not been given. He shall come in without warning and obtain the kingdom by flatteries. Armies shall be utterly swept away before him and broken, even the prince of the covenant. And from the time that an alliance is made with him, he shall act deceitfully, and he shall become strong with a small people. Without warning, he shall come into the richest parts of the province, and he shall do what neither his fathers nor his fathers' fathers have done, scattering among them plunder and spoiling goods. He shall devise up plans against strongholds, but only for a time. And he shall stir up his power and his heart against the king of the south with a great army. And the king of the south shall wage war with an exceedingly great mighty army, but he shall not stand, for plots shall be devised against him. So again, we've seen this king before, back in chapter 8. And here he is described as the contemptible person. Another good translation might be the despicable person, the despicable king. No good thing could come from Antiochus. And like kings before him, he engaged in battle against the kings of the south. And he was fairly successful. History records how Antiochus defeated the Ptolemaic kings of Egypt and came and took power away from them, and eventually Antiochus would return home to his land. But in time, because it's what beastly kings do time and time again, he went down to wage war against these kingdoms of the south once again. Only this time, it would go much, much differently. Look at what God predicts. Again, some 400 years in advance. Look at what God says will happen here. Verse 29 and 30. At the time appointed, he, again, this is Antiochus, he shall return and come into the south. But it shall not be this time as it was before. For ships of Kittim shall come against him, and he shall be afraid and withdraw, and he shall turn back. This second time Antiochus comes down, it does not go according to his plan. There's a fascinating detail here in the story that shows the incredible accuracy of these prophecies. As Antiochus Epiphanes is coming down to fight against Egypt, his journey was interrupted by the Romans, the rising superpower in that day. These are the ships of Kittim that are described in verse 30. History records the famous scene where Antiochus, he was intercepted along his journeys by an elderly Roman general who came with a message from the Roman Senate. Return home or find yourself at war, not just with Egypt, but with Rome as well. See, Rome was the rising superpower, and they wanted to expand their empire and halt the expansion of Antiochus and these Greek kingdoms. And they don't like Antiochus very much, and so he came to halt Antiochus's efforts. Now, Antiochus, being the wicked, contemptible king, the prideful king he is, he didn't like this very much. He didn't like the challenge from the Romans, and so he said, well, I need some time. Give me some time to consider this with my advisors. What am I going to do here? How can I outmaneuver the Romans here? And in a really cool, crazy part of the story, this Roman ambassador, he drew a circle in the dirt with his sword around Antiochus. And he said to him, before you step out of that circle, give me a reply to lay before the Senate. Basically, you step outside of the circle any other direction than going back home, you're at war with Rome. Antiochus didn't like that very much, but he really had no choice. He wasn't a dummy. He knew he couldn't handle the Roman armies against him and his forces. And so he turned backward to his homeland in anger and in humiliation. And his travel home took him back through the land of Israel. And so on his way back, as he came to Jerusalem, he unleashed his wrath and his rage against God's people in a ferocious way. Remember, we heard about this a number of weeks ago in chapter 8. But verses 30 and through 32 recount some of the story of what Antiochus did. And it says, and he, Antiochus, shall turn back and be enraged and take action against the holy covenant. That's the people of God. And he shall turn back and pay attention to those who forsake the holy covenant. Forces from him shall appear and profane the temple and fortresses, and shall take away the regular burnt offering. And they shall set up the abomination that makes desolate. He shall seduce with flattery those who violate the covenant, but the people who know their God shall stand firm and take action. Enraged and humiliated, Antiochus turns back through Jerusalem to go back home. He takes out his wrath upon the people of God. When Antiochus and his armies came, they killed some 80,000 Jews, men, women, and children. 80,000 people on a single day. And he didn't just kill. He also tried to destroy the way of life of the people of God. He outlawed things like circumcision and the sacrificial system under threat of imprisonment and torture. Things the people of God had been doing for some 1,500 years every single day. Antiochus comes in and just wipes that out in a moment to try to destroy the way of the people of God. And in a great act of defiance against God, Antiochus desecrated the temple in Jerusalem. On the altar of God, he installed an altar of Zeus, his Greek god. And on that altar, he sacrificed a pig, an unclean animal, in the temple, on God's altar, to desecrate the altar of the Almighty God, so that Yahweh would have no place in his temple anymore. This is one despicable, contemptible, beastly king. You see, from the days of exile onward, God's people were almost constantly under the domination and control of beastly kings and their kingdoms. One king would rise, and then another, and then another, and then another. And Daniel is set up in such a way as if to draw our attention to this fact that this cycle is repeated time and time and time again. And truthfully, guys, this is still going on today. I just saw in the Seattle Times an op-ed on Friday with a political cartoon. The headline was, "History keeps repeating itself in the Middle East." It was a political cartoon looking back to Titus and the Roman generals when they came in and destroyed Jerusalem in 70 AD. The problem is the article doesn't go back far enough. You see, this cycle has been going on for time and time and time again. And God made this known through the prophet Daniel centuries before it all would happen. And again, I think God reveals this because he loves his people. He gives clues to what is coming so we can be prepared and so that we can faithfully endure. My dad used to tell me when I was a kid, a failure to prepare is preparing to fail. How many have heard that saying before? Anybody? Anyone heard that saying? A few hands? Yeah. A failure to prepare is preparing to fail. And I think there's some truth in that. If we fail to be prepared for what is coming, we're only setting ourselves up for failure. But if we are prepared, if we can see what is to come, then we can endure the hardships with patient, faithful endurance. It's like catching a glimpse of the shore through the fog. If we can see where we're going, then we can persevere until the end. And the question would be for us, how are we preparing for what God has revealed for us? There's another pattern that emerges in this chapter, though. I said we can sum it up sort of in kings shall rise, but we also see another pattern that just as kings arise, so too these kings will fall. There's a myriad of ways in which this is described in this chapter. Every time a king arises, there's something else that happens that brings them down low. Verse 4, for example, says, his kingdom shall be broken and divided. This king will fall. Verse 6, she will not hold the strength of her arm. This queen it talks about cannot hold on. She too will fall. Verse 9, but he shall return to his own land. Can't take other person's land. He has to return home. Verse 11, he shall raise a great multitude, but it shall be given into his hand. This land will fall. Verse 12, he shall not prevail. 17, he shall give him the daughter of women to destroy the kingdom, and it shall not stand or be to his advantage. Verse 18, but the commander shall put an end to his insolence. Verse 19, but he shall stumble and fall and shall not be found. Verse 20, and within a few days he shall be broken, neither in anger nor in battle. Verse 30, and he shall be afraid and withdraw. Over and over and over again. Just as kings rise, so God says these kings will fall. Now, I believe that Daniel was written to people who are in difficult situations, in difficult times, meant to give them hope in the struggle and suffering in which they find themselves, hope in the midst of beastly kingdoms. How does this comfort God's people, I wonder? Well, I heard a story recently of a man who went on a camping trip. He arrived at the trailhead and began making his way to the campsite for the night. And at camp for the night, he pitched his tent and turned in for the evening, got in his sleeping bag and hunkered down. And in the night, a huge thunderstorm came up with all kinds of wind, and you could hear it running through the trees, and trees falling down, and thunder and lightning and loud crashes. And as the tempest continued to grow in intensity, these loud noises continued to increase, and this man became terrified, lying in his tent. Was the world going to end? Was a tree going to fall down? Was thunder and lightning going to continue on forever and ever? And he did not sleep a wink that night because of the loud noises all around him. The crashing of thunder, the loud banging together of things. In the morning, as the storm subsided, he came out of his tent and his fears were quickly lifted. Because in the morning, as he came out, he looked out at the river by which he had been camping by. And he had saw some massive giant logs that had come loose overnight in the storm. And these massive giant logs, tossed to and fro by the wind and waves, were smashing up against each other over and over and over again, making these loud crashes all through the night. The sounds that had frightened him so much suddenly made so much sense because they could see what they really truly were. And what filled him with hope and reassurance was the fact that though these logs, noisily banging together though they were, even dangerously at times, were perfectly kept within the banks of the river. They were perfectly bounded and totally contained the entire time. In the same way, my friends, this passage is meant to show us that God has set the borders and the boundaries of these kings and their kingdoms. He has fixed the day of their comings and their goings. He let them rise up, and ultimately, he will be the one who will frustrate all of their plans. And none of them is able to do a thing outside of the bounds which God has already ordained. And it's no different for us today. We live in an age when beastly kings and kingdoms still reign and rule, and where there are battles and wars, they are common fare in our day. Just look at the events of world history today. War in Ukraine, war in Israel. And I think if we just changed a few of the details, we could pretty much read this text from chapter 11 into our own day today. Now, thankfully, we live in a country where we have a ton of protections, a ton of blessings of the Lord, but there are Christians all over the world today who are actively being persecuted by dictators and tyrants. And those Christians, just like us, need the perspective of Daniel to know what is to come so they can live now with perseverance and endurance. And most importantly, they need to hear the reminder that despite present circumstances, God is in control, that he has fixed the boundaries of these beastly kingdoms, and that though kings will rise and kings will fall, all of it happens according to God's amazing and incredible plan. See, the vision of Daniel 11, though from a vastly different time in history, I think gives us an apt description of our lives today, our lives at the present. And we see how we are to live today. But then something really interesting happens in Daniel chapter 11. Right at verse 36, there's this progression of the rise and fall of kings and kingdoms, but then it takes a turn. And we go from looking to what was future to Daniel, but past to us, to something that I think is going to come far in the future from even our day. Verse 36 through 45 speak of another evil king who will rise and who will do as he pleases. Now, there are those who see verses 36 through 45 as a recapitulation of the story of Antiochus, that this king was so wicked, so evil, so vile, that the story had to be told twice. But when you start to look at the details there of how all of this plays out, I don't think it describes Antiochus' life actually. The details there just don't seem to line up quite like the way the rest of the kings and their kingdoms do in verses 2 through 20. And then when you couple that with the language of the things that talk about the time of the end, I'm persuaded that this is talking about a wicked king still to come, even future to us, one who some have called the Antichrist. Now, as soon as I say that, I know there's immediately questions. Who is the Antichrist? Tell me, help me identify him, please. Let me know who this person is. Be frank with you, I have no idea, okay? And no one knows. I don't know if we can know that sort of thing. Someone much wiser and smarter than I might be able to discern what is going on there, who this person might be, but that's not me. So go ask Pastor Steve. He's a lot wiser and smarter than I am. I think it's a fool's errand to try to speculate and to offer a guess as to who, and I don't think God cares about the who, or at least doesn't care about telling us who. More importantly, God wants us to see who this figure will be like. What is the characteristic of this coming king, this future person of lawlessness? I think he tells us in verses 36 through 37. And the king shall do as he wills. He shall exalt himself and magnify himself above every god, and shall speak astonishing thing against the God of gods. He shall prosper till the indignation is accomplished, and for what is decreed shall be done. He shall pay no attention to the gods of his fathers, or to the God beloved, or to one beloved by women. He shall not pay attention to any other gods, and he shall magnify himself above all. Now, we don't get a complete picture of who this person is, nor all that he will do. We can see a few things about this coming wicked king. Clearly, it says he will be a man of great pride, a man of massive arrogance. He will exalt and magnify himself above every god. in every way. In the truest sense of the word, this person will be an absolute narcissist, concerned only with himself. And he will have a total disregard for God and for all other gods of all other religions. He will pay no attention to any other God, as the text says. Certainly not the God of the Bible, and certainly not the God of any other religion. And he will be a law unto himself. He will do as he pleases, as he alone wills, meaning he is a man of lawlessness. No law to be on this one. I think this is the picture we get from Daniel 11 of this super mega beastly king who is to come. This quintessential ruler, dictator, leader who will one day arise and will lead many astray. And what is fascinating is that the same picture of the lawless one carries over into the New Testament. The Apostle Paul picks up on this language as he describes one whom he calls the man of lawlessness in 2 Thessalonians chapter 2. I'm going to read verses 3 and 4. Just hear what Paul says about this coming one. Let no one deceive you in any way, for that day will not come unless the rebellion comes first and the man of lawlessness is revealed, the son of destruction, who opposes and exalts himself against every so-called God or object of worship. So he takes his seat in the temple of God, proclaiming himself to be God. Now, in the context here, Paul is referring to the coming of Jesus again. The Thessalonians have questions. When will Christ come back? What will it be like? And Paul goes on to talk about it. But he says, before Christ will come, that day will come, but before that comes, this one of lawlessness will be revealed. And in a very similar way, he gives the description of this man of lawlessness. He will be self-exalting, God-denying, a narcissist who is a law unto himself. He will exalt himself above all gods. He will proclaim himself to be God, and he will have no regard for the laws of God, but will be a law unto himself. This is the picture of the man of lawlessness to come one day. Doesn't that sound a lot like Daniel chapter 11? This wicked king who will arise? See, I think God is helping us to see through the fog to a coming day when this lawless one will be revealed. But Paul goes on to say something fascinating in verse 7 of chapter 2. For the mystery of lawlessness is already at work. Fascinating. Looking forward to the day when the lawless one will be revealed, but he says even now in his present day, in Paul's day, the lawless one is already at work. This lawlessness is already in our world, friends, and we live in a similar time of great lawlessness when countless people will live in flagrant disregard to the God of Scripture. They will deny God. They will consider themselves to be God as if they were themselves God. And so while Scripture speaks that before the return of Jesus, there will be this super mega beastly king who will come, who will lead rebellion, who will act in lawlessness, that person is already at work in our world as lawlessness runs rampant. The Apostle John tells us something similar in 1 John chapter 2, verse 18. Speaking of the last hour, John writes, "Children, it is the last hour, and as you have heard, that Antichrist is coming. Yet so now many Antichrists have come, therefore we know it is the last hour." Antichrist, whoever this person is, will come. But John tells us many Antichrists have already come. There have been and will continue to be many such people, anti-Jesus, anti-God, exalting themselves into the place of God. They lived in Daniel's day, they lived in John and Paul's day, and they live among us here and now. And so I think the point of Daniel 11 is that we not try to ascertain the identity of the Antichrist to come, but rather it's to consider how we might live now faithfully in the present moment in light of the one who is to come. And that every generation needs to grapple with what it looks like to live here and now faithfully in light of the end that is to come. Daniel 11 gives us a reminder that one day this super mega beastly king, this Antichrist, will come, but also that he too, in the very same way as these other kings, will be bounded by God and his sovereign plan. Just as all the other kings will rise and fall, so too will this man of lawlessness. After speaking of what this one will do in verses 40 through 45, of this conquest, of this rise and fall, of him coming to war against the king of the south, look at verse 45. In the end, what will happen to this lawless one to come? It says, he shall pitch his palatial tents between the sea and the glorious holy mountain, yet he shall come to his end with none to help him. That last verse is key for us to see. He shall come to his end with none to help him. Daniel 11 is reminding us that the earthly kings will have their day. Even this Antichrist king to come, the Ancient of Days will have the final say. And what is that final say of those who follow our God, who follow Yahweh? Well, chapter 11 shows us some pretty gnarly stuff that might happen in the future as this lawless one comes. And maybe you even caught a glimpse of it, and you're seeing the shore through the fog, and maybe you're saying, I don't want to swim towards those shores. I want to get back in the boat and go back the other way. But there's where chapter 12 kicks in to show us the glorious, wonderful hope that is to come for those who in the end will faithfully and patiently persevere. We catch a glimpse of what will happen in the end for the people of God in chapter 12. Look with me, chapter 12, verses 1 through 4. At that time shall arise Michael, the great prince who has charge of your people, and there shall be a time of trouble such as never been since there was a nation till that time. But at that time your people shall be delivered, everyone whose name shall be found written in the book. And many of those who sleep in the dust of the earth shall awake, some to everlasting life, and some to shame and everlasting contempt. And those who are wise shall shine like the brightness of the sky above, and those who turn many to righteousness, like the stars forever and ever. But you, Daniel, shut up the words and seal the book until the time of the end. Many shall run to and fro, and knowledge shall increase. I love the promise we see here, that the time of the end, Michael, the great archangel, the great ruler, the general of the Lord's armies, he will arise, will be sent from God, and he will come and fight on behalf of the people of God. What this tells us is that in the end, God himself will rise and will fight for his people. There may be times of trouble as the final battles of history are waged, but God will send his angel armies to rise up and fight and to deliver his people in the end. That's what he tells us in verse 1 of chapter 12. But at that time, your people shall be delivered, everyone whose name shall be found written in the book. At the time of the end, the people of God will be delivered, everyone whose name is found written in that wonderful, beautiful book. And oh, the glorious hope that is here, found in these few simple words. Just as surely as these kingdoms will rise and fall because of the decree of God, so too shall we rise and be found to be delivered, those whose name are written in this book. It will happen, friends. It must happen, my friends. This is the language of certainty. It will come to pass. This is the decree of God, and so we can take it to the bank. Despite how loud the logs thunder in the water, we can know that one day we will be delivered by God. And we know this. We know this is true because the war has already been won in Christ. Our deliverance, our assurance, our safe passage through the storm has already been secured through the life, death, and resurrection of Jesus. The story of Daniel 11 is that an evil king will rise, who will take lives and who will conquer. But the story of the rest of the Bible is that the true king, the greatest king, will arise and will give his life. And in giving his life, he will conquer Satan, sin, and even death itself. This is the final king who rose from death and who now rules and reigns over all things. And through faith in this greatest king, in King Jesus, our deliverance is secure. And so we await the day when he will gather us to himself forevermore. At that time, your people shall be delivered, everyone whose name is found written in the book of life. And verse 2 tells us something else incredible. Many of those who sleep in the dust of the earth shall awake, some to everlasting life, and some to shame and everlasting contempt. Here is the most explicit and clear statement in the entire Old Testament of the resurrection of the dead. It is explicitly clear. Many of those who are asleep in the dust of the earth, those who are dead, they will awake, they will rise, and some will rise with Jesus to everlasting life. But others will arise to an eternal punishment, to shame, and to everlasting contempt. Both of these realities are shown to us at the end of Daniel chapter 12. When God comes, when the end comes and God arises to deliver his people, he will raise some to everlasting joy, others to shame and contempt. And the question we all need to wrestle with this morning, will you be part of those resurrected to everlasting life through faith in Jesus? Or will you be one who is sided with the kingdoms of this world, who will be put out, put away, and who will rise to shame and everlasting contempt? Which kingdom will you be part of? The kingdom of the Antichrist or the kingdom of the Christ of God? The vision closes at that point, and we see Daniel back on the shores of the Tigris River. Once again, we see two angels and this man clothed in linen, this picture of Yahweh, this picture of God. And there are some questions asked. Verse 6, how long shall it be till the end of these wonders? How long till all these things that are spoken of will be wrapped up, will be buttoned up and tied up, and the bow of history tied on them? It's an incredible scene. And in the end, this man clothed in linen, God himself speaks. Daniel records, as I heard the man clothed in linen, who was above the waters of the stream, he raised his right hand and his left hand toward heaven and swore by him who lives forever that it will be for a time, times, and half a time. And when the shattering of the people, when the shattering of the power of the holy people comes to an end, all these things would be finished. These things will be for a time, times, and a half a time. The exact time reference here is ambiguous. I don't think we're supposed to know exactly what he meant, but I do think we can know with absolute certainty is that they will not go on forever. They are bounded and contained, that God has set the end of days, and one day he will come. I love that Daniel doesn't fully understand. Verse 8, Daniel says, I heard but did not understand. And then I said, oh my Lord, what shall be the outcome of these things? But apparently God has told Daniel enough, and he doesn't really answer his question. And sometimes it's okay for us to have unanswered questions. But God has shown us enough in his book how we are to live now in light of what is to come. And so twice, as God winds things down, he tells Daniel, go on your way. Look at verses 9 through 13. And God said, he said, go your way, Daniel, for the words are shut up and sealed until the time of the end. Many shall purify themselves and make themselves white and be refined, but the wicked shall act wickedly. And none of the wicked shall understand, but those who are wise shall understand. And for the time that the regular burnt offering is taken away, and the abomination that makes desolate is set up, there shall be 1,290 days. Blessed is he who waits and arrives at the 1,335 days. But go your way till the end, and you shall rest and shall stand in your allotted place at the end of days. Notice twice what the Lord says. Go your way, Daniel. Go your way until the end. Apparently, we don't need all of our questions answered, but God has answered enough so that we, like Daniel, can be encouraged to go our way and live in light of the things that we have seen. Go your way, Daniel. Go your way, living in light of what you have seen in this vision. Go your way, continuing to live as a faithful exile until you arrive at your final home. This is how we are to live as Christians. Like Daniel, we are to go on our way. We know how the story will end. God will deliver. Jesus will return. Evil will be done away with, and there will be everlasting joy for those who follow Jesus now in this life. And so we must live now in light of that great end, living as faithful exiles until the day of our resurrection, living now in hope of the future that is to come, living now, trusting in the God who rules over all things. We live now, not in fear of the beastly kings and kingdoms, but secure in our deliverance. We must live now, purifying our lives in holiness and righteousness. And we live now in faith in Christ, knowing that despite present circumstances, he is always in control. And this is the glimpse of the shore that we see through the fog. It's meant to fill us with a sense of perseverance and to cause us to swim on in joy as we make our way ever closer to those final shores. And so as I close for one more time with this sermon series, let us ask the question, how then shall we live as faithful exiles in beastly kingdoms? I want to return briefly to where we began this sermon series, all the way back with our first sermon in Jeremiah chapter 29. There we learned that faithful exiles are to seek the shalom of the city. As the exiles were headed into Babylon, that was their charge. Settle down, settle in, seek the shalom of the city. Don't separate yourselves. Don't sink your ties and mold into the culture, but seek the flourishing of the city in which you find yourself. And the same goes for us here, Harbor Church. As we live in light of the end to come, we must go now, seeking to love our community with the love of God. This is how we live now in light of what is to come. And so as we go on our way, we go seeking the shalom of the city. We live as faithful exiles as we live with holy lives dedicated to God. Throughout this incredible book, we see these exiles time and again living lives wholly dedicated to God, lives of righteousness. Never once did they compromise on their faith to God. Not when they were threatened with their lives, not when they had to interpret impossible dreams, not when they were being thrown into a fiery furnace or into a den of lions. Never once did they renounce their faith in God, but they lived lives of holiness dedicated to God. And so must we. In light of the end to come, we must now live in holiness and purity dedicated to God. If we're to live as faithful exiles, it will entail us doing so, living holy and righteous, again, dedicated to God. And finally, how shall we live as faithful exiles? Working toward our final rest. I love the final words of this book of Daniel. Verse 13, but go your way until the end, and you shall rest, and shall stand in your allotted place at the end of days. Rest will come, friends. We have this as our sure and steadfast hope. Jesus will come. We will be delivered. We will be resurrected one day. And on that day, there will be wonderful, beautiful, joyous celebration in the presence of our Lord. Rest will come. But for now, go your way. Go about your life, back to your work, back to your school, back to your marriage, your family, your friends, and keep on being about the King's business. So go on working, but work toward your rest. Work not to earn your rest. Christ has accomplished that for us. The work is finished. The work is done, and we know with absolute surety that we can be resurrected with the Lord one day. But until that day, as we go about working, not working for our rest, but toward the eternal rest that is to come. And so we live as faithful exiles as we work toward our final rest. What a wonderful, challenging book this has been. Daniel speaks volumes to us today, and it will continue to speak to us as we continue to reflect on the lessons that God would show us. Daniel has shown us what it looks like to live as faithful exiles in the world today. And the question for us is, will we? Will you? Will you live as a faithful exile in the midst of beastly kingdoms? As you go, how will you go? Will you go to shalom the city on behalf of Christ? Will you go on your way to resolve to live in greater holiness with a life dedicated to God? Will you go in hope, knowing that despite present circumstances, God is in control? And will you go your way to work, not for your rest, but toward the eternal rest that is to come. May we all live as faithful exiles in beastly kingdoms. And may we go now to live now in the present in light of what is to come, the end that is our final rest in the days allotted for us in the presence of our Savior and our Lord. Let's pray. Oh, gracious Father, we are thankful for your wonderful and beautiful truths revealed to us in your word. God, we thank you for giving us vision through the fog that we might see what you are doing in this world and how we might live in light of it. We thank you for your power to confine, to bound the beastly kings of this world, and for the perseverance that you give us to endure whatever may come. And we thank you for the deliverance that one day awaits those who put their faith in your Son through what he has done. And God, as we consider these things, help us to live now in light of the end that is to come. Give us a love for our community, that we would seek the shalom. Cause us to live lives of radical holiness dedicated to you. And empower us to go about our way, working toward the rest that you will give us at the appointed time. God, we thank you for this wonderful book and the prophet it has been to us. And God, I ask that whatever has been spoken today, that if it is of you, it would resound in our ears and in our minds, and that anything that's not of you would simply fade away. And that through that, you would cause us to become more like your beloved Son, in whose name we pray. Amen.